Colleagues, thank you very much for joining us today at this meeting, which is a consultative dialogue on textile and garment industry outlook amid COVID-19. I do understand that some of our esteemed panelists are due to join us in a while, but just to respect time and the time of others, we're going to start in a punctual manner. So basically, just to give you a background before I move to the introduction of our esteemed panel, this dialogue series is part of our program called Strengthening the Use of Evidence for Development Impact, SEDI. And the main objectives around this program include supporting the government to understand what SMEs in the trade space and exporting firms need to cope with the COVID crisis. Second, what these stakeholders think their needs would be and if they have been reflected in the fiscal, trade, and SME policies. And thirdly, of course, what kind of facilitation the federal government, the provincial governments need to put in place to support the SMEs in the trade space and the exporting firms which are aiming to pivot as a result of COVID-19. The main outcomes that we are trying to achieve here is that mainly this is going to be the series of dialogue is going to be the input for Ministry of Commerce, which is involved in implementation of various very important policies, including the strategic trade policy framework, national tariff policy, e-commerce policy, etc. And they're keenly looking into proposals from these discussions, which could help expedite some of the interventions in these policies. Besides, of course, for improved and more liberal regulation of trade, Ministry of Commerce has been advocating for reforms being initiated by FBR, such as the National Tax Harmonization Council, Board of Investments, Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative, PRMI, and programs for regulatory improvement initiated by the provinces. With this, let me introduce my esteemed panel here. We have with us Mr. Gonzalo Varela. Gonzalo is a senior economist in macroeconomics, trade and investment global practice of the World Bank, where he leads the trade program. Previously, he worked in the World Bank's Global Trade Unit in Washington, D.C., and in Ministry of Industries of Uruguay and in the private sector. We're also being joined by Mr. Ghulam Qadir, who's a noted economist with the government of Pakistan, has worked in various capacities at the Ministry of Commerce, and his current serving is at the National Tariff Commission, government of Pakistan. Mr. Hamid Tufail is associated with the Ministry of Industries and Production. He's currently serving as board member at the National Productivity Organization and Pakistan Stone Development Company, PASTEC. Both are affiliate organizations of the ministry. We also have Ms. Tayyiba Batul, who has worked in various positions with the federal government and government of Punjab. Her most recent association has been as an advisor to the Federal Board of Revenue. In government of Punjab, she was associated with the Punjab Urban Unit. We will also have Dr. Kamal Manusab, who's a renowned author and noted trade economist. Dr. Sab also heads Samira Fabric Private Limited. He continues to advise the government in various capacities. He's on the board of 9 different important organizations from both public and private sector. Mr. Rahim Nasir is CEO at Aisha Spinning Mills. He's been playing an active role at this company for the past 26 years, continues to play a very active role with APTMA as well, All Pakistan Textile Mills Association. And of course, he continues to advise and guide on matters related to facilitation required by textile and garment sector. We will also have Mr. Muhammad Babar Khan Saab, who is the CEO of Multinational Export Bureau. He's also ex-chairman of Pakistan Hosiery Manufacturer Association and ex-president of Federal Bureau of Industrial Association. Finally, we'll have Mr. Usama Nizamani, who is associated with Islamabad Policy Research Institute, IPRI. He continues to advise on matters related to startup facilitation, e-commerce, and social entrepreneurship. Apart from these panelists, I'm grateful to the faculty at Pakistan Institute of Trade and Development, Government of Pakistan, particularly their faculty for joining us and also encouraging the probationers to join this discussion. We will have the facility to engage with the panelists in the chat box as well. As moderator, I'll also be taking your questions through the chat box. But of course, for any comments and observations, any additional ideas that you may have, further to what the panelists have suggested, please do keep the conversation going in the chat box facility, which has been open for you. With these remarks, allow me to request Gonzalo for his keynote and presentation on the subject. We have particularly requested him not only to shed light on the subject and the discussion, but also to help us understand the recent research and evidence which the bank has produced for the Ministry of Commerce, including the recent report around modernizing trade in Pakistan. So Gonzalo, it's over to you, please.
So let me start with the following. The reason we want to discuss trade is because we want trade to be a force for growth. So what is happening with growth in Pakistan and what is happening with the main underlying source of growth in Pakistan, that is productivity. So productivity in Pakistan has been declining. If one looks at a long-term trend starting in the 1980s, the rate of productivity growth, total factor productivity, a typical measure, has been falling from 3 to 2 to 1%. If you compare that with the evolution of productivity indicators in India or in Bangladesh, what you see is the opposite trend. Productivity increasing in India, productivity increasing over time in Bangladesh. So there is something going on with total factor productivity in Pakistan that is impeding growth, is impeding development. And that's something that is going on may have to do with the fact that investment, private investment, is falling. And what you see in this slide is an indicator called capital deepening, which basically means what is happening with the stock of machinery per worker in the economy. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? If there is capital deepening, the stock of machineries per worker should increase. So in a world of automation, we would expect more equipment per worker. In Pakistan, what we see is the rate of growth of capital deepening is actually falling, again, contrasting what is happening with India and Bangladesh, other countries in the region, to some extent comparators. So what is it that we need to do to unlock productivity growth? That is the only thing that is going to lead to more growth and development in the long term. So two things: we need more knowledge. So we need firms in Pakistan to be able to learn more, and we need more competition. So this is a hypothesis. With more competition, firms are going to have incentives to get better, but also they will need to have more knowledge to be able to get better, right? So they will be able to learn. And this is where the link to trade is very clear. And let me show you, this is data for Pakistan. And data for Pakistan, if you look at the productivity of firms that never export, the productivity of firms that haven't exported but will become exporters next year, and the productivity of firms that have exported along the whole period, that have systematically exported, what you see is that as you move from non-exporter to occasional exporter to always exporter, productivity increases. So yes, it is more productive firms that get to export, but once they start exporting, they get better, they learn. So exporting is a platform for learning. And the other thing is also that foreign companies operating in Pakistan is also another platform for learning. And if you compare, and this new chart, the chart on the right shows the productivity of domestic firms, the productivity of those firms that do joint ventures that at some point are acquired by a foreign owner, and the productivity of firms that were always foreign owned. What you see again is an increase in productivity again, along these three categories. That is, having FDI in the country is going to help increasing productivity. All in all, what this is telling us is integration into the global economy, being it because you export, being it because you connect with multinational companies, is a force for productivity growth. So how has Pakistan been doing lately on this? Not very well. Trade hasn't been picking up. 2005-2018 comparison, exports increased in Pakistan by 47%. Compare that to what happened in Vietnam, exports increased by 660% in the same period. So something is going on. And it's not just the value of exports that is not growing, it's the composition is not changing. So take Vietnam's exports in 2000. And if you look at the composition of Vietnam's export in 2000, it seemed very much the same as Pakistan's composition of exports. A lot of leather, footwear, and textiles, a lot of agricultural products, including rice, and a little bit of other things, commodities, services, etc. See Vietnam export basket today, completely transformed. They still export primary products, agricultural goods, coffee and rice. This is the yellow part of the chart. They still export textiles and apparel, that is the green part of the chart, but they incorporated many other things, like for example, TVs, radios, telephones, electronic integrated circuits, the light blue part on the left, computers, right? So they diversified substantially. They continue exporting the same things they were exporting before and added many other things. Compare that to Pakistan in 2000, a lot of textiles, the green part, a lot of agricultural products, the yellow part, some services. Fast forward to today, same picture. Rice, a lot of agricultural products, a lot of textiles, a little bit more of ICT, which is probably the positive thing. And if you look at the textile composition, you see that actually, even within textiles and apparel, there is not much diversification. So you have house linen and you have men's suits and pants that account for about a third or more than a third than all of the textile export. So that is, there is something going on there with diversification of the sector. So perhaps the most important question to ask, perhaps all of this is known to many of the panelists and participants. The question to ask is, what is it that we need to do? What would it take to make Pakistan and Pakistani firms go global, right? And this is, I think, the million-dollar question. I don't have the answers. I will have some hypotheses that I would like to present and see how it resonates. I know that I'm going to leave aside certain things that I know that people are going to say: electricity, cost of doing business, access to finance. All of these are challenges, but I will leave that on the side because yes, those are challenges. Many countries face them, right? But let's try to identify those that other countries don't face, and there are challenges that are to some extent policy introduced, right? So that with policy changes, we can get rid of those challenges. So the first thing that I wanted to say is, to make Pakistani firms go global or do better globally, you need more competition at home. You need more competition at home to boost productivity and incentivize exporting. In other words, more competition at home has also an aim, and is tariff reform. Ghulam Khadir is there. He works in the National Tariff Commission. The new tariff, the tariff rationalization exercise, which was included in this budget, is a great step forward. It is a good step forward. It brings reductions on about 1,600 tariff lines. That is about 20% of tariff lines. That will reduce cost of production for firms. That's a good thing, but much more can be done. And what you have in the screen is a chart that shows the effective protection that sectors in Pakistan face. And you know, I keep repeating this, and I'm going to become boring, but an import tariff is implicitly a tariff on exports. And why is that? It's not only because sometimes these import tariffs fall on inputs that manufacturers need to produce something, like melt-blown fiber having a tariff of 12% makes it very difficult for firms that want to produce N95 masks. So you need to be very competitive to be able to produce the N95 mask if you need to pay a tariff of 12% of melt-blown fiber. Or synthetic fibers, that is, or trims, or the typical challenges that apparel producers face in Pakistan, importing these synthetic fibers, these trims, etc. Think about the import tariff also as something that keeps you or induces you to sell domestically rather than exporting, right? Because it gives you more coziness in the domestic market. It gives you a profit buffer in the domestic market. So if you have a high tariff, you don't want to go and export and go through that trouble. Bicycles, I was looking because I can see a lot of publicity being made by these exports of microwave ovens to Bangladesh, which is a very good thing. And then I started looking at different tariff lines, and I saw bicycles carry a tariff of 52%. So bicycle producers in Pakistan will prefer to sell bicycles in the domestic market because they face a 52% protection. They will not export bicycles, right? So the story of the tariffs is very important because tariffs are implicitly a tax on exporting. And the chart that you see there, you see that even for textiles and wearing apparel, when you think about tariffs along the whole value chain and calculate effective rates of protection, you see that even textiles and wearing apparel that are competitive, in theory, competitive sectors in Pakistan, face a lot of effective protection. So this effective protection is discouraging exporting to some extent. Let me move to the second element. And the second element is something that in theory, one could say, if one wants to help exporters, instead of giving them tariff protection, move to a smart strategy of promotion through branding. And there are two angles of branding, right? One is firms building brands that are known internationally so that they can, instead of selling products to IKEA or to Zara, selling directly to the final consumer, building a brand and getting a higher price. But you also need a branding strategy that is external to the firm, that is not something the firm can do, it's something that the country can do at a big level, right? Countries face a bias in some cases, and Pakistan may be one of them, maybe a country that is not necessarily associated internationally with high quality products. So that requires improving the quality at the firm level, but also increasing branding efforts to tell consumers across the world that Pakistan has good products to offer. And this requires concerted efforts at the country level. And that is also going to help with attracting investment. The second element, and this is becoming more and more relevant, particularly in this context of COVID, that is just accelerating certain things that were already happening, is e-commerce. That is an opportunity for branding. So for example, if Hadi was going to connect to consumers internationally directly, e-commerce is a great platform that brings closer Hadi with consumers that are across the world. So it is easier in this context to build a brand internationally because you have e-commerce platforms that allow you at relatively lower costs to get closer to the final consumer. Now, for that, you need payments gateways, international payments gateways on which Pakistan still lags behind. And you need a system of logistics that is efficient. So for firms in Pakistan in the apparel sector to be able to directly sell to consumers in the US or in Europe or in South America, what you need is logistics that are able to quickly bring the goods from Pakistan to the rest of the world. And for that, then you need those type of policy changes and investments that allow logistics to function more efficiently. But of course, e-commerce is not the final solution to everyone. The apparel sector will still require access to global buyers, and the connection to the final consumer is not going to help these firms sell 100% of their production, right? So the third thing is that there needs to be coordinated efforts in terms of branding with efforts that have to do with investment promotion. This is probably the largest challenge that Pakistan has when you compare it with Vietnam, with Cambodia, with other countries in Southeast Asia that have done very well in terms of trade. Is what is it that they did differently? Well, what they did was they attracted large investments, large FDI of key firms that came and transformed the production basket in those countries. And those investments need to be export oriented if you want those investments to boost productivity. So that coordinated efforts between investment promotion and export promotion is crucial. And let me finish with one thing that is the last element that you need, and this brings back to the story of productivity, is firms needing their capabilities improved. And what you have there is a chart that shows the challenges that agricultural exporters face to export. And the largest challenge is conformity assessment. And the reason I'm putting this on agricultural exporters here when we are talking about textiles is because it links. And I'll explain why it links. So conformity assessments, ensuring that the products you're selling are going to be accepted in international markets, is a huge challenge for these agricultural exporters. And that is because they don't have necessarily the capabilities to go through the whole process of certification, testing, and validation so that they get their products out there. When it comes to textiles, and when we think about the new markets that are coming up, the new segments that are coming up in this context of COVID, one would say that PPE is a great opportunity for Pakistani exporters, clearly, and many Pakistani exporters are taking advantage of this. And I keep seeing examples of protective equipment that is exported everywhere. But not all firms can take advantage of this because selling protective equipment requires complying with standards. It's not just like selling a t-shirt, which you still need to comply with standards, but the standards needed with protective equipment are much more stringent. So you need FDA approval and you need CE approval if you want to go to Europe, UK, or the United States. Those certifications, standard compliance and further certification requires efforts, requires knowledge, and requires money. So if Pakistan is going to support, it's going to jump into this wave because this PPE is here to stay. This is not going to go away when the pandemic is sort of controlled. PPE will stay as a key segment. And what we need is that SMEs have access to information about what is it that it takes to comply with these requirements and support to actually get those standards and those certifications. So if I were to summarize these three elements that I mentioned when I was posing the question, what would it take to bring Pakistan firms globally? I would say three things. First is introduce more competition. Tariff reforms are going to help with that. So move away from this idea that tariffs are going to protect you. Tariffs actually don't protect you. Tariffs actually shelter you from any competition and learning. Second element is promote. Incentivize branding building by firms, but also do branding building at a country level. This is going to accrue benefits for everyone. And third, build firms' capabilities so that they can take advantage of international market opportunities. So I'll stop here and glad to engage in the conversation as we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Really appreciate this comprehensive analysis. And I would encourage everyone to actually go through the detailed report as well, which has a much deeper analysis around the three aspects which you identified, including the tariff reform, smart branding and promotion, and firm capabilities. I think without ado, I will first request our esteemed panelists from the private sector to offer their interventions, and then perhaps come to our colleagues affiliated with the public sector so that a response can be solicited. And I think I'll move to Dr. Kamal Monu Saab, who's joining us here today. And Dr. Saab, not only your thoughts on this subject would be very valuable for us and the federal government, which is aiming to take some concrete measures in this direction, but how you see this one of the points which Gonzalo made around the textile and garment sector pivoting and taking opportunity from COVID-related gaps which are there in the market, including, for example, the production of personal protective equipment, etc. And of course, we would also like to have your reform. We would also like to have your opinion around the welfare implications that this crisis had, not just for the micro, small, and medium enterprises who are in this sector, but also the labor-industry relations that are getting challenged as a result of COVID pressures. Doctor, please.
Thank you, Dr. Vakar, and good morning to all the participants. It's a pleasure to join in, and very, very incisive and sort of, informative presentation by Gonzalez. So thank you for that. So I'll just keep it brief. I think he's touched upon quite a few things vis-a-vis textile in Pakistan, but I'll try and keep it focus from a private sector point of view. What exactly is happening on the ground, where we stand today, and what really is the future. So one or two things are very clear. That one is the long-term perspective, which of course Gonzalez was talking about, but then there are these short-term realities which have taken place because of the COVID-19 situation. And that is what the industry in Pakistan is facing today. That is probably what the textile industry around the globe is, and that is what the government of Pakistan specifically coming to us needs to address. And the basic thing is that when we look at the structure of the Pakistani textile industry, like it or not, 75% approximately, give or take, of the installed capacity is geared towards exports. So if exports stutter or the foreign markets stutter, and when we the foreign markets, we are typically talking about the EU, which as a group is our largest customer, and US being the second largest customer. So these are the two zones we're talking about. When they stutter, the Pakistani textile industry stutters as well. So that's the short-term reality. And that is exactly what has happened with COVID-19. Consumption in the European Union and the US has obviously taken a nosedive. And with that, the orders and the shipments and the entire transactions have actually gone down in Pakistan as well. So what can the government do in the short term? So the first thing I think what the government can do is to make sure that these export houses, which have sprung up after a lot of effort and which are globally competitive and the things are normal or in normal times, they should survive the next 4 or 5 months. So I think that should be the immediate goal of the government. And what can the government do to make sure they survive? That is to make sure they remain liquid. Because for any business, 2020-21, maybe till the first quarter 2021, it's all about survival. And so the government really needs to ensure in one way or the other that these entities, these export houses remain liquid. And there are a number of ways to do that. State Bank has announced one scheme is, about retaining labor. I don't think that is good. It needs further modifications and improvements, especially when we compare our schemes of retention of labor and even keeping companies liquid with the European Union. UK has a scheme which is far more generous. I can talk about it in detail, but that'll take a lot of time. It's not just furlough, but it's direct cash injections into SMEs depending upon their size and revenues. So it can be anywhere between £50,000 to £100,000 in the next 4 months. So that's the kind of ballpark figure they're talking about. EU has done a similar exercise, and they've done a number of measures to ensure support in terms of finance, in terms of taxes, in terms of social security, in terms of payment of labor up to 1/3 their wages and so on. And there are host of other things they've come up with. So of course, Pakistan, we can talk about it in detail, but I suppose there's limitation on time. So Pakistani government needs to come up with a practical scheme whereby two things happen, that these exporting institutions, especially or textiles or rather all exports, are they remain liquid, they don't close down, because recreating them would be very, very difficult, and you lose the market goodwill and a history of knowledge. And B, of course, come up with schemes, better schemes whereby they can actually retain. Just giving them loans is not going to be enough. Because ultimately those loans have to be repaid, and if the companies are not operative, repaying loan would be a challenge. So that's one aspect. The other is what happens when the consumption starts returning. So when the consumption starts returning, meaning as Europe gradually opens up after August, September, maybe US starts opening up as well, and resume their activities, even if not to optimal, and consumption returns. So what we will definitely witness is a much increased competition from our regional competitors and our traditional competitors as well. So the government needs to make sure, and the private sector, along with the private sector, it's always a partnership, that are we prepared? Are we now using this time to adequately be prepared for the increased competition we should expect once consumption returns? Because it's not going to be simple. Things have changed, perceptions have changed, the way of doing business has changed, and protectionism has increased as well. So part of the demand, which all the developing countries, especially the exporting countries like Bangladesh, India, China, Pakistan and all we had, or Myanmar now is Vietnam and so on, will be compromised simply because a big chunk of the consumption is going to go to the domestic producer or the domestic supplier. So we should be ready for that. And now what that percentage is depends upon what kind of industry remains in the EU and US, and what revivals are they talking about. But general ballpark figure is that approximately 10 to 15%, if not up to 20% of the demand, which previously used to be there, could be lost for us to their home supplier. So that's one aspect. And then we people, with whatever reduced consumption level there is, reduced demand there is, and the lost demand owing to protectionism to the local industry, we will be competing for that. And once the competition heats up between Bangladesh, again, all these exporting countries, and again, we can talk about the numbers, and because there are 5 main sectors: power, as taxes, sales tax being especially very, very prominent at 17%, labor rate, gas, and then raw material itself, which could be cotton or yarn or whatever. So we can do a comparative analysis. Again, that will take time. I've briefly done a comparative analysis of Pakistan with Bangladesh, India, and Myanmar, and then gone on to do a bit of a comparison with the European Union itself for a producer who might be producing based in Central Europe or in those areas of Czech Republic or Slovakia or even Ukraine and so on. And what we see is that virtually on cotton, if we see today's Pakistani rates for the new crop, we are more or less at par with any producer in Bangladesh or India, Myanmar, even Vietnam, and even Europe for that matter. At par at best, if not slightly more expensive. But when it comes to other four main elements or inputs or raw materials, we see Pakistan is at a complete disadvantage. And this is in power, this is in terms of sales tax, this is in terms of even labor, after accounting for productivity, and even the gas tariffs. So I think a dialogue is needed very urgently, where the private sector and the government should sit down, seriously crunch these numbers, and come up with a joint strategy and policy of which is, of course, one short term, how to immediately make sure that these firms don't close down, especially the SMEs, and keep them operative and liquid, and then formulate a strategy 4 months, 5 months down the road for at least the next 2 or 3 years, because this challenge is not going away anywhere. So I'll stop at that, and if there are any specific questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sab. I think these were some very important points, particularly around the need for the central bank to look into what other countries are providing as facilitation to the firms, and the fact that liquidity provision for the firms need to be put in place for at least the next 6 months to keep them afloat, as well as supporting them towards their labor costs. I think your point around the comparison of the 4 items where Pakistan really loses, or where the cost of production really increases, around power sector rates, GST, labor wages, and gas-related charges. I think this requires attention as well. And these are the specific components of the cost function which really pull up the cost and maybe making things uncompetitive. Maybe I think I'll, taking lead from your insightful inputs, I'll now move to Mr. Rahim Nasir Saab for his inputs on this subject. Rahim Saab, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dr. Wakar, especially for inviting to this webinar. Dr. Gonzalo's presentation was very informative. I think, again, taking cue from what Dr. Manu said, I think now is the time in the COVID circumstances. We need to look at the short terms first and then look at the long term. And long term, we've been talking, as part of our association as well. On many other forums, we've been giving our viewpoint of how to cater to the textile industry, the textile problems. But just to, I think I'll just take cue from what Dr. Manu said and take it from there. I think currently in the COVID situation, the COVID circumstances of the world, I think the most important thing is, the sales are down. Manufacturing, say Pakistan, India, varying from industry to industry. I'm talking about textiles. It varies from sector to sector. I think there's a lot of cost pressure, considering that there's a lot of sellers and there's a big supply-demand gap. Demand has gone down about 20 to 30%. This is after when all these retailers open up, but we see about demand reduction of about 20 to 30%. In this scenario, how does Pakistan and its competitors compete in the international market? I think most of the sales that have come back have been on the lower end of the product, the basic products. I think retailers like Walmart, Costco, and the discounters have done really well. Their sales are up back to, I think, 100%. On the other hand, if you look at high street retailers like Gap and these companies, high street retailers, their sales are down maybe 70 to 80%. Many have gone bankrupt. So all in all, the total demand has gone down about 30%. So the key for the next 6 months would be to target lower priced goods, and those are the areas where sales have come up really big. Again, we talked about e-commerce. Amazon have done really well. Again, all the basic products are selling very well. So I personally, I am in the socks industry, and our sales are up. We mostly do US, and our sales are up back to about 90+%. So, but looking at the garment side, the knitwear side, their sales are not even at 50%. We have the big sector in Pakistan. The denim sector has been hit very hard. I think they're also below 50%. So it varies from product to product. I think high street retailers, high street brands are not doing well. So what do we need in these areas, in these times. One, ease of doing business, and the other is cost of doing business. I'll talk about cost of doing business first. So for the last 2 years, we've been enjoying the industry of Pakistani textile industry was given 7.5 cents electricity and $6.5 of gas. And this was on the premise that our competitors like India, Bangladesh, China have similar cost of utility. I mean, similar cost of electricity and similar cost of gas. This year, we're talking about the federal budget. The subsidy was reduced from 26 billion to 10 billion. I know the Pakistani government is in a financial crunch, but we have to look at what the industry needs. If we talk about the export industry, cost of utility, cost of electricity, gas is a big component in the whole textile chain. So if we are not able to commit this year on this cost, which is the 7.5 cent as committed by the government, and $6.5 of gas, I think that the textile industry will be in doldrums. It'll be a big problem for the industry. Considering what has happened to oil and the raw materials and the futures of gas, I think now this year we'll see our competitors getting electricity and gas at a much lower rate. I think gas futures, LNG futures hit the lowest ever. Oil hit $20, $19, went back up to $40, but gas futures are still at their lowest. And I think it's high time that government needs to realize that the Pakistani textiles competitors will be getting gas at maybe $3.5 or like $4 or $4.5 delivered to their factories. So this is one area we need to look at. I think one of the suggestions from APTMA to the government in the financial budget was, that Pakistani textile industry is fragmented. It's not that one factory produces everything. So there is, in these circumstances where the companies are in major losses, there's a minimum tax in tax structure, which is 1.5% of sales. So when a product is made, for example, cotton is converted into yarn and spinning, and when it's sold to a weaving factory, it attracts a 1.5% factory. It's another 1.5%. So by the time the product is exported, it has already incurred 6% turnover tax or minimum tax. That's a big cost in the times where sales are down, demand is down, and everybody's gonna fight over prices. So, and last year, not this year, last year, the turnover tax was increased from 1.5 to 5% to 1.5%. So it was one of the suggestions, but it wasn't taken by the FBR. Again, I think Dr. Manu talked about sales tax. We feel there is a big amount of textile industries refund stuck at the FBR. We don't have official figures. We're not provided with official figures, but numbers of over 100 billion rupees are pending to be refunded. I think this is a big amount for the textile industry. As a rule of thumb, I think easily if this 100 billion, 120 billion is returned, 4 times, 5 times of this value can be increased in exports. DLTL was one scheme, and we've been really fortunate that this last year the government of Pakistan, the Department of Commerce, they paid a lot of money back in DLTL for the payable for the last 3 years, and it's really helped Pakistani textile industry. Textile, if you look, as a comparison to other industries, have always been more structured. Whenever there's a dip in export, or circumstances where exports are down or the economy is down, Pakistani textile is the least hurt because of the strong fundamentals. You compare it with leather. Leather, is textile. Leather is, in 2017 when the government started focus on the export industry, they came up with a 7% DLTL at that time. Textile was down about 10% from highs, and leather was down 50%, about 50%, more than 40%. So I think there's fundamentally textile is far better than other exporters in Pakistan. But again, it needs, as Mr. Gonzalez was saying, there needs to be a lot of research on the productivity side. That we've asked the government, and there was a effort as well to, and there was approval as well that Guernsey to review the textile industry and see where we stand vis-a-vis the world textile industry and where we lag, so we can improve on those areas as well. Just a last point. When we talk about our structure of exports of the textile industry, I think there are two main raw materials, which is the cotton and the polyester. Cotton production is down from highs of 14 million to 8 million last year. This year, we're not seeing any, we're not optimistic. So 6 million bales is short in Pakistan, which needs to be imported. Again, we need to look at the import structure, the tariff structure, if we want the export to work on. But realistically speaking, polyester is where Pakistan lack in the long term. I think this sector needs to be looked at all over the world. Polyester has a 70%, more than 70% share. In Pakistan, it's only 20%, 21% to be exact. So we really need to look at the poly chain. I think there's a lot of tariffs involved. We need to deregulate the textile, the polyester sector, starting from the PTA plant, which is the Lotte plant. I think it's a very old plant. It's still, and if I would request the NTC to do a study on this and see the productivity and the cost effectiveness of the whole textile, of the whole polyester chain. I think we need to do a study of PTA plant, which attracts, on the import, it attracts 5% import duty. That's just the basic raw material. I think there should not be any duty on the basic raw material coming into Pakistan. And then when you have 5% on the basic raw material, then, as you do cascading, the duty structure has to go up, and which in effect makes the textile chain expensive. So I feel that PTA plant is the key here. We need to start. We need to do a study on that. It's the oldest plant in the world. We feel it's 50% less efficient than all the Chinese plants, the new Chinese plants. So if we can reduce deregulate the polyester chain and reduce the tariffs, I think it will be helpful. Any questions? I'm available. Any points I can answer on these.
Thank you, Rahim. So I really appreciate your inputs over here. I think your point around both looking abroad as well as locally for a competitive cost structure is certainly well taken. I think on your suggestions of APTIMA, which were given for this year's budget, I think it will be good to see which ones of these were not accepted. And I say this in view of the finance advisor's press conference, where he said that there may be possibility of revising the budget estimates around the end of the first quarter or the start of the second quarter, depending upon the COVID situation and the liquidity available with the private enterprise. So I believe there will be value for the Ministry of Finance to look once again into APTIMA's proposal, and certainly the proposal around the minimum turnover tax. So thank you very much. Our last representation from the private sector, before I move on to our other colleagues, is from Mr. Babar Khan Saab. Babar Saab, please, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you, Mr. Wakar and his team, and Dr. Gonzalez for providing the platform to exchange the views. Our other participant gave a very good insight. The thing is that our country, our bureaucracy, our team and government lack a culture of export. We couldn't produce or couldn't develop a culture of export. What we are doing right now, because this export is because it's our business, we don't have any other business, but we don't have a culture to produce how to improve and the export. And what's the export? Actually, the thing is that like our bureaucracy, what we put in our trade development department and other departments, they even don't know about exports. So like the policy we make always an ad hoc basis. Our policy is always on ad hoc basis. We don't have long-term policies. We don't have the planning how to improve the exports per year. We even don't know what we require to improve the export. Like how much infrastructure we are requiring for export, what type of infrastructure we are requiring, what facilities we need to give to our SMEs or our exporters to produce this culture. Like we don't have proper industrial areas, we don't have our proper export processing zones. We have a very limited export processing zones. We don't have even the technology to produce new things to give to our buyer. Like our basket of export is very small. In textile, we have limited fabrics. That's why our export is limited. We cannot like grow with like China or Turkey or other countries, because the importing of these raw materials is very difficult, and we cannot we are not producing these raw materials. So our basket of exports is very limited. So first of all, we have to produce a culture of export and the right infrastructure. Otherwise, we keep talking about things and we cannot succeed. And all the policies will be short term and ad hoc basis. So what I suggest that we have to write through this forum, we have to rightly determine where we are lacking. What are the problems with our infrastructures? What are the problems with the imports of raw materials? And what, like we have a very limited items to provide to export or to offer to our customers. So how we can improve or how can we increase our basket of export? And you see the problems everybody has discussed, that the refunds problem. Exporters are being indulged in getting their refunds out, and it's a big exercise. Then the utility cost, and also like the intermittent supply of the utilities of gas and electricity. And even in city of Karachi, we are very limited supply of water. Water sources are like due to incompetence. Our industry area even doesn't have the proper water supplies. So if we are not going to remove these hurdles, our basic hurdles, and we are not going to make new industrial areas for export purpose, we cannot increase our export. That's the main thing, because they are at this sector, and even the labor in this sector, the textile sector is providing like major employment in this country, but there is no benefit for our labor to come into this field. So slowly this labor pool is also depleting, because they don't see any advantage to coming in this this field. So we have to think about new technology, about our labor pool, how to incentivize our labor, how to train our labor, and how to how we can provide a career to our labor. Labor is very important in this textile field, especially. And for the other thing is infrastructure. The infrastructure of all the industrial areas are full. New SMEs cannot even enter into this business, or if they are they are doing business, they cannot grow because of the cost of infrastructure. So if you want to grow the SMEs, and so we have to provide a cheaper infrastructure. So that's my suggestions. And we have to, and the other thing, like a lot of the points our esteemed participant has already said, so I don't want to repeat that.
Thank you. Thank you indeed, Babar Saab. I think your point around having a culture of export facilitation is extremely important. And also, I think one of your observations around whether or what are the binding constraints to SMEs growth in the trade space, I think that's where there is recent evidence coming in, and we hope that our colleagues in the government would be listening and picking up on some of those points. Maybe I would now turn to Ms. Tayyiba Batul. Tayyiba, you have been listening to both Rahim Saab and Babar Saab, and both of them touched upon the refunds issue, the need to improve the FBR export facilitation schemes. And I believe you are best placed in the panel, given your recent association with the Federal Board of Revenue. What is the FBR thinking as a way forward to improve the export promotions regime, the refunds regime? Tayyiba, please.
Thank you, Dr. Waqar, and good day, everyone. As we all sitting together here in this panel realize that these are challenging times, and I think that, you know, very rightly, this is the time has been set for this kind of discussion. Just so that we have an idea about the industry size and the export size, we realize that, you know, textile and garments is the mainstay. It has, you know, a unique importance in our industry as well as the export structure overall. So with that perspective, the government also, though I'm not in the government presently, but since I have been directly associated with the government since 2008, so I realized that, you know, a lot of efforts are being done from the part of the government as well to ensure maximum facilitation. But some way or the other, those things do not get materialized as they were envisaged when, you know, the thinking was done or when the policy was being crafted out. So some of the things that I would like to now highlight, for example, the government has export facilitation schemes for export-oriented units, manufacturing bonds, duty and tax remission for export schemes, temporary importation schemes. Then we have, you know, separate rules for the export processing zones. But somehow, as Manu Saab and Nasir Saab has highlighted the refunds problems, which ultimately lead to liquidity problems for the exporters and for the industrialists. Now, the thing is that somehow at the end, let's say last year when I was with the FPR, so those things, if we, you know, specifically talk about the refunds, they do want to process the refunds, but somehow the procedural things that have to be followed, they are so lengthy and cumbersome, because they have to ensure that all the refunds that have been, the refund claims that have been received are correct as well. because ultimately a lot of the refund claims end up being fudged. So in order to ensure such kind of things, the process overall becomes very lengthy. So maybe, in future, one of the measures that can be taken is to devise such kind of mechanisms which are not, because already the government is doing a lot of work on ease of doing business. They have developed all the e-portals to ensure that, the person, the in-person presence of the industrialists or exporters or the representatives is lessened, and more things they can deal online. So these things are already in process. So maybe for the refund process as well, such checks can be introduced into the electronic system, that there and then, if the claims received are fudged, then they get rejected there and then. And because, for example, the 100 billion rupees figure that was shared by Nasir Saab for the refund claims, now I'm sure this will be carrying a lot of claims that are not yet cleared, and it will be actually the overall submission rate of, or the overall submission value of the refund claims. So, not all of the claims then necessarily are correct. So these are some of the things that from the point of view of the processing of refunds can be improved. Then from the, because Mr. Gonzalo shared very good presentation, and I remember such work was earlier also done somewhere in 2010 to 11. And then I think that was presented to the then government in 2012-13. So in that work also, it was, similarly, 3 products were identified and a whole business process was developed. But one thing that remains missing, because I am a firm believer of, from my extensive engagement during my 5 years at the Ministry of Commerce as well, because, for the trade policy making, we do extensive consultation process, and we engage with the exporters, the businessmen. From those engagements, I know that the businessmen have their set of things in their mind going on, because they are competing in the international markets for cents. It's not, the overall dollar or $10 or $100 or 1,000. They are competing in cents with their competitors. So they are very prudent, they are very sharp, they understand their business very well. So that report also, it was very well done work by the Planning Commission, but it couldn't be implemented because though a lot of branding schemes were introduced in that report, and how the businesses can be boosted, but just because the involvement of the businesses was not there in that report, it couldn't get the results as were envisaged. So I think that this work being done by Mr. Gonzalo as well, if it includes an extensive engagement with the relevant exporters, with the relevant industrialists, and if we are talking about textile and garments industry, then the whole value chain must be looked into very carefully, because a lot of things are imported, they have their cost that needs to be then added to the overall export cost. So, and if there are things that, we are producing locally, but for example, the PTA thing, because of the little lesser competition in the domestic market, the prices are oftentimes escalated and the exporters ultimately suffer. So such kind of a detailed value chain analysis is conducted in this report for making the Pakistan goes global, then I think that will be very helpful. And one other thing that I would like to highlight, because in the strategic trade policy framework that I worked on in the year 2013, and then and 14, and then that policy was for 2015 to 18. That was a 3 years framework. Somehow the policies were developed with extensive consultation of the private sector, but ultimately when it was the time for its implementation, the management at the government end was changed, and the new management that came in did not introduce the processes or the implementation mechanisms as were envisaged. So the processes were made a little complicated, and there were no takers. Therefore, if there was a DLTL scheme announced, then there were no takers because the process was made a little complicated. Same was for the earlier policy as well, in which I was engaged. That was for the year 2012 to 15. We introduced a lot of schemes for the SME sector and for encouraging the women businesses specifically. Those schemes were also, there were no takers as such from the policy. Apart from the institutional things, they were fully implemented. The facilitation things, they were fully implemented. But as far as the product development related things, there were no takers because the processes were made such that there were lesser takers. So when the consultation is conducted at the time of policy making, then the similar consultation has to happen at the time of introducing the processes or mechanisms for their implementation as well. And it should be ensured that the complete SROs that are developed, which are ultimately to reflect the process, how the exporters can apply into the scheme, those complete documents or the SROs should be discussed thoroughly with the exporters so that they can give in their contribution and guide the government as well on how can, because ultimately the government is also having good intentions, nothing bad. It's just that, you know, they can subside all the false claims. They want to ensure that the money goes to the right people. But if it is a cumbersome process, then, you know, you are not even able to give the money to the right person. So the overall objective is defeated. So these are few of the points, and I wish I had more time to conduct an overall analysis to share the, because we did last year with FPR when we were developing the budget proposals, we did some growth prospects exercises. So I wish I had time so I could have then gotten into the pre-COVID, post-COVID growth prospects and how, if facilitation measures are introduced pre-COVID, post-COVID, you know, those kind of simulations, what results could they have gotten? Because these simulation exercises are very important, though they are not true representation, but they give you an image of how closer you will be able to get. So these are few of the points that I wanted to share.
Thank you, Naiba. Really appreciate your inputs over here. And I think we could continue on the pre and post-COVID simulation maybe in the next round of dialogue, because that is also extremely important. And thank you also for bringing in the perspective from the FBR regarding the fact that it at times becomes difficult to process the claims or to ascertain the credibility of the claims. This is a point which we have been hearing from their side as well, and the need for continued engagement with the exporters on this aspect to simplify the accessing of these exporting schemes and verification of these exporting schemes. and also the aspect around encouraging or having women-specific business facilitation. May I just request all the panelists that there are some questions which are being posted to you in the chat box. If you find it convenient, you could answer them in the chat box as we go along. With this, may I request Mr. Hamid Khan Saab for his inputs, please.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good afternoon to the all panelists. Thank you, Dr. Waqar, for arranging this webinar and having me over as a speaker. Since the topic is COVID, how does the COVID has kind of impacted the productivity or the overall textile industry. So the major challenge that COVID has brought to the industry is the slowdown in the global demand for the textiles due to lockdown and the closure of buying houses in the major markets like US, Europe, and other markets of the world. Now, the situation has started improving with some emergency demand orders for the specialized product like personal protective equipment in the pipeline for the industry. But overall, the demand for generic textile product is close to very low, like mentioned by Dr. Kamal Mannu Saab and Rahim Nasir Saab. In general, the market for textile product would remain extremely competitive globally due to the low demand cycle. So what the COVID-19 has brought the challenges for the textile industry, the factors that contributed are closure of the transport and lockdown have disturbed the supply chain and the distribution network for the textile industry, the workforce attendance in the factories. That has led to impacting the meeting the deadlines for delivering the orders by the textile sectors. Productivity and competitiveness have always been a major challenge for Pakistan industrial sector, and textile sector is no different. There are many contributing factors that are impacting the competitiveness of the Pakistani industrial sector. Some of them are already discussed by Gonzalo and by other distinguished panelists. Some of the factors are that the textile industry or the overall industrial sector in Pakistan has failed to modernize and lack adoption of the technology that was required by the global competitors for enhancing efficiency and quality. Our processes are still labor intensive. That is why there's a question on the impact of the high labor wages and the cost of the total product that make us uncompetitive. The other major contributing factor is no benchmark standards are followed in the industry. Energy provided to the industry is not utilized optimally in the system. Barring few exceptions, industry in general lack taking energy audits and conservation tools and techniques for conserving energy. Demand and supply gap of raw material, especially cotton and polyester. Like Rahim Saab and Gonzalo have already pointed that tariff structures with extraordinary protection to the local industry is hampering them becoming part of global value chains. Lack of fiber and product diversification and lack of value addition at every stage in the textile value chain. Lack of technical textile product range in the textile sector product offering, especially the personal protective equipment and fashion wear. Lack of training and trained workforce for the textile sector. So these are some of the factors that are contributing towards the productivity and competitiveness of the industry as a whole and textile sector in general.
Thank you very much, Hamid. So I really appreciate your inputs over here. And I think your point around the benchmark standards is of course important, if there can be government facilitation that challenges or encourages the private sector to follow certain benchmarks would certainly be welcome. With this, let me invite Ghulam Qadir sir for his inputs, please. Qadir sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for inviting me. It's a privilege and an honor for me to be here and to be talking to this distinguished panel and sharing some of my thoughts. I think a lot has been said about the problems that we have been facing, and somehow our ecosystem has not allowed us to export as much as we would have liked. There are governance issues, there are productivity issues, that and obviously governance would obviously impact the competition in the market, and but then there's probably some lack of sophistication on part of part of the private sector also. So we got to realize that the problems are both ways, and both these aspects they need to get more efficient, and they need to work together and make this implementation more possible. You see, I would just like to start off with by sharing some of the stats. I would just talk about the last fiscal year. Our exports until July to January were growing at a steady, like only 2.2%, and international prices were low. But all of a sudden there was, and then not all of a sudden, but there was a move by the government. They started paying around 50 billion rupees have been paid to the textile sector in as part of refunds. And cotton in December, on January 16th, cotton was also zero rated and approved by the ECC, and the import was allowed at zero rate. So that sort of, and plus another important factor was the China-Pakistan Free Trade Agreement came into force on the 1st of January 2020. So we saw a sudden jump in February. Our exports, February and March, mid of March, we saw some very positive numbers, and we sort of registered double-digit growth. Somehow, and then as we are all aware, COVID-19 struck us, and things sort of fell apart. However, I think another factor, and I think this government must be commended for the way they tackled the situation. In April, our exports fell down by almost 60%. In May, they started recovery a little bit, and then some major SOPs were introduced. Monetary side, there was some monetary incentives were given. Interest rate was slashed down, just to make life easier for the businessmen. Obviously, there were difficult situation, and to keep, the government was trying to encourage, labor retention and stop possible unemployments. SOPs were made. I think that was Ministry of Commerce's initiative, and advisor to Commerce, to the Prime Minister on Commerce and Investment. He was in touch with the industry on daily basis, even during these testing times. He was in office, and he was, conducting these meetings day in and day out. The Secretary of Commerce was very, very active. That led, and that's how the concept of smart lockdown actually started in the government. And because they were the ones who were, enforcing and persisting that they will develop certain SOPs, and the export sector was allowed to export. So we could see that in June, our export figures, the decline was reduced sharply, from 50 to 60%. It came down to around 10-15%. So I mean, we could see that the decline had sort of bottomed out, and now it started to improving. obviously there are so many things, and the solution cannot be, short term. And obviously there could be some things like, the distinguished panel has discussed. I mean, I would like to quote here the example of China. Firstly, everybody started, saying that, this COVID has come from China, and US was getting angry, and, and they were naming and shaming and all. But then, then the world needed PPEs. So they had to turn back to China because they had that ecosystem, that they had the sophistication, they had the availability of the raw materials and the manufacturing capacity and the labor productivity and the competition and the enterprise and, the marketing skills, plus they're very good in e-commerce. I'll just give you an example that the Canton Fair that could not happen because of the COVID situation, it took place online. And all, it continued for more than 10 days. So that's how, I mean, so, I saw the figures and they was amazing. Around monthly exports of PPEs are around $10 billion. And around $8 to $9 billion of that is being done by China. So, and obviously we were nowhere in the picture. And firstly, we were worried because of lack of competition that, N95 and, all these PPEs, if we start exporting to them because of the market inefficiencies and lack of competition. So only in June that we were able to, with consultation with the health ministry, we were able to issue a notification allowing export of PPEs. And obviously that too is very challenging because there are certain raw materials which are not available in Pakistan. I'm just some of the long-term things that the government is doing, and I think in order to implement those things, one is national tariff policy. The other one is the textile policy, and both of them are going in tandem. And this year it has been decided that and by the way, I would like to share with you that the textile policy's main motto this year is to integrate and allow man-made fiber and and allow Pakistan to become part of the poly chain. So, I mean, we can expect lots of good things happening in terms of tariff relaxation this year because textile is going to be a priority sector for Pakistan and NTC for national tariff policy this year. However, I'll just like to conclude, but the action plan, and this is something I would like all of you and plus and highlight the significance of this consultation session. You see, we were doing this China-Pakistan Free Trade Agreement Phase 2. Like I said, it became enforced in January 1st of this year, and there was a lot of backlash, and there was very little acceptability that a country like Pakistan could do that, and because private sector was not happy and so on. But we, as part of the Ministry of Commerce at that time, we did extensive consultations with the private sector. We did a lot of analysis work. We built a good narrative, created an acceptability with the government and the private sector, and then we moved on. And we got a very good deal from China. You must have seen that Hugo Boss, it's just yesterday, Hugo Boss, has done has requested some companies in Pakistan to prepare to make sportswear for them. And I think, China is a big market for that. Also, we just got 0 rated from 15% of tariff on sportswear, and it's a branded item, and from Pakistan, that investment can lead to really enhance exports from Pakistan. So all in all, and we are also developing a strategic way forward how to move about it. And there are 4 pillars in the national tariff policy. One is to improve accessibility of raw materials. Number two, make investment easier, give protection on investment, and wherever, and also see where Lotte was discussed, and see if there were certain incentives given to the investments previously, and those need to be revisited. Third is to completely overhaul the tariff structure, because it's filled with so many SROs, and there are so many different slabs, and it creates a lot of applicability issues, and because we don't have a good national single window system working as yet at the customs, and a good risk management system is not in place. So, so what we have proposed is that, and what we're going to do is that, it's almost on the implementation stage, that, we're going to conduct initial studies, and we're going to build, we're going to build a narrative, with cogent arguments, and I would really, and then we are going to reach out first after doing the desk research and, all of that. We're going to reach out to the private sector and get their viewpoints, and we'll try our best to, because obviously there are different viewpoints within the governments, and you have to beat those. I would again quote the China-Pakistan FTA example. FPR was vociferously against that FTA, but and we had to make a presentation to the Prime Minister twice, and we made a presentation to the federal cabinet also. But because our narrative was good, it was research oriented, backed by some cogent arguments, then there was political will also. So that happened. And we got some very good concessions from China. So in the same case, like you see, we really need to stick together and build good arguments, because that is very important in order to defeat FPR's narrative or any other narrative, protectionism or any other thing. We need to give them good alternatives also. So we need to be very, very practical. One final thing that, I think another proposal that I would like to make here is, the METI Japan. I was studying that model, and I came across a very interesting thing that, they have permanent working groups on each and every sector, be it textiles, surgical goods, footwear, and all those. They have many working groups, and they're mandated legally, and they are very inclusive. They have private sector participation, government, all the major, stakeholders, they sit together. They have independent economists and researchers in there. So they every year they publish, a working paper on which they have certain targeted recommendations which are binding. And I think this is something that is missing, and we need to collaborate, and we should ask the government to notify such working groups. And for each sector, they have to be different. So, leaving here, if there are any questions, I would be very happy.
Thank you so much, Kader Sahab. I think taking lead from your last point around empowering the working groups, that's certainly one advice that has gone from this forum earlier as well, that a lot of those task forces which the PTI government has initiated, in good faith certainly, they need to be empowered, and some of their deliberations should be mandatory or sort of in need for compliance, because most of what they have been recommending in the past, they really don't see a follow-up of how much of it was implemented. And thank you also for providing us for an early review of the Pakistan-China FTA's second phase. Certainly, we look forward to further reviews and also highlighting the 4 pillars of the tariff policy. Last but not the least, I know we are running beyond time now, but let me now bring in Mr. Usama Nizamani. And of course, he has a very careful eye on how Pakistani retailers could integrate into the value chains using e-commerce. So Usama, it's over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Waqar Ahmed, and I would also like to extend my gratitude to all the speakers. I think I stand educated after having gone through, such educating insights from each speaker. I think from an outsider's perspective, since I'm not a industry player, I'm more of a researcher who actually focuses on digital governance related issues. So I'd rather, give certain points with respect to some things that I've learned from today's discussion, and also give some takeaways which will be instrumental in making sure that we can help generate a more export-based awareness in small and medium enterprises that wish to become exporters in future. So one thing that I think that I did come across was the observation that the ongoing adjustments that we need to make for our exports should be focused more for the short term. I think we need to be more focused and geared towards at the long-term perspective, because as we can see, the demand is certainly starting to resurge, and I think that momentum is likely to grow and keep on going in the near future. So I think the most important thing that we need to focus right now on is to make sure that we're preparing our potential actors and established actors in the market for the upcoming future. What is needed is that we should utilize this interim period to make sure that we create as much export awareness across our market actors and those potentials that want to in the future. Either with respect to cost and utilities, I don't know how much relevance it does make, because I'm sure cost and benefit analysis. But I think it's also important to make sure that, as Mr. Ghulam Qadir has pointed out, that we need a seamless synchronization on part of government creating budgets for exporters and for potential exports as well. So we need to make sure that there is seamless synchronization on behalf of bureaucracy. The second is with respect to the access to utilities. I think it's important to consider, would it be possible for established actors, it's just a teaser question, would it be possible for established actors in the industry to actually move some of their operations to either newly established SEZs or SEZs that are in the process of becoming operational in the near future, and to make sure that on the government's part, access to utilities and all the needed solutions that you chain are catered for, are provided to all the industry actors. The other question,
sorry, Osama, we can't hear you.
Is that with respect to if that are required, because to my observation, the cost of labor is something that is going to be very convenient for the established industry actors, and at the same time, I think moving businesses closer to areas where you have, like, let's say, access to services such as, or utilities such as natural gas, would again cut down the cost of utilities in one way. Now, to come on to the other aspect with respect to making sure that we have established brands like, for example, Gul Ahmad, Qadi, etc., etc. And I don't know how they're actually right now focusing on enhancing their exports to new markets or emerging markets. I think it would be important to study the patterns of these emerging markets. Like, for example, if you're to take a look at the markets like Africa, what are the demands, the trends, or the fashion trends that people really follow over there, and to basically make sure that we cater our products to the demands of the market. And then I think one of the ways to go about it would be to go for low-key and cost-effective steps rather than large leaps. So partnering up with established actors in those markets would be a good way and a good step to go about, and make sure that we can enhance the exports of our Pakistani brands as well. On the other hand, I think with respect to financial tech solutions or payment solution like PayPal and other companies, it's been so long in the debate, either in the media or in other circles, that PayPal has been reluctant to come to Pakistan. This is something that I've discussed with Dr. Waqar as well, and I think people, those that may be privy to these discussions, I think it would be a good idea to go about with approaching other competitors to PayPal and see that if they would be interested to come to Pakistan and to study what kind of compliances or regulation would they require from the government. And at the same time, I think it's important for government and PTA-like actors to make sure that they come up with policies that are not going to serve as any kind of impediment to these companies. And this is something that is a bone of contention in the ongoing debate on citizen protection rules. The other important aspect that I think we should be, or the government should focus on, is under its Digital Pakistan initiative, and particularly on how to go about and promote our exports. I think it would be important for initiatives like Digital Pakistan to make sure that e-governance related initiatives are catered or are extended to exporters. So this would also include making sure that we come up with online platforms. Like, for example, TDA app has an online directory for probably some 20,000 exporters that are based in Pakistan. So I think if we can club that under some single umbrella project, which can basically provide steps on how to apply for an export license, ranging to each step that goes in the process for exporters who usually have to rely on physical steps of making sure that they are able to become as legitimate exporters. I think it would be important if we just club all these steps together under a single umbrella initiative. That would really create a tremendous amount of ease for potential and established or emerging exporters. And to go about this way, I think Ms. Taiba did mention about this point as well, that if some online intervention can be introduced for claiming subsidies, I think a similar initiative, if it can be augmented into the one that I am proposing, or to some newly conceived initiative, I think it would be important to do that as well. And another bit would be to make sure if we come up with like, let's say, WhatsApp chatbot like initiatives to make sure that people in remote areas that would want to sort of put their capital and become potential exporters can learn these steps through chat box in their regional languages, because a lot of the time people do not have familiarity in English language or other languages. So I think perhaps having access to readily available information that they can relate with would make the job really easier. So I think that's where I will basically hold my horses. And just last point would be to make sure that we're adding a lot of, or are providing proactive commerce attaches, because I see there's not so much being done on part of our commerce attaches as it could be done, because I think that is the key to making sure that we can get our
So, Usama, thank you very much for your inputs. Really appreciate your inputs. A lot of these good ideas around Digital Pakistan initiative and how that can help the overall e-solutions for exporters, the fintech ecosystem. I think most of these are very, very important inputs, and I think something which Ministry of Commerce would like to take up with the central bank as well going forward. So really appreciate these. So just in the interest of time, I think I would sort of start first of all by thanking all the panelists Hamid Khan Saab, Ghulam Qadir, Dr. Kamal Monu, Mr. Rahim Nasir, Mr. Gonzalo Varela, Ms. Tayyiba Batul, Mr. Usama Nizamani, Mr. Babur Khan. Thank you so much for your inputs. I saw a very rich discussion in the chat box, something which we will certainly make part of our report. Plenty of good advice coming in from the participants. I do understand that the probationers from PTAD had to leave, given that they had their next session at 12:30. But just in terms of the way forward, all these SEDI dialogues are being archived at our dedicated web page. So in case any of you would have your written inputs, like one or two of you referred to your reports, your pre-budget proposals which you have sent to the government, please feel free to upload them at the web page or send to us directly, and we will archive them in the SEDI Dialogue series. There's a report that we send out to the Ministry of Commerce based upon this dialogue, which we try to send out. We will try to send out in the next 5 working days, and we'll copy all of you in, so that in case there are any additions to that which you'd like to make, please feel free to do that. Our follow-up on what you have said over here and in the days in our next dialogue. The next dialogue is planned for 22nd of July, which will be focusing on not just the follow-up from this dialogue with the ministry as well as the Trade Development Authority of Pakistan, but also focusing on the next sector, which is the food, agriculture, livestock, and horticulture exports of Pakistan. So I would really look forward to your participation in the next dialogue as well. I will continue my engagement with most of you. Our team will come back to the esteemed panelists for any further inputs. Really appreciate your time, and my apologies that we have gone beyond time. Thank you very much for giving us that allowance. And I look forward to having you back for the next dialogue. Thank you.